Welcome to Puzzling Company, your home for at-home puzzles and mysteries. Here are your hosts, Jared and Zach.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Puzzling Company. It is your host, Zach, and always with me is...
It's Jared.
Jared, hey, how are you doing?
I'm tired.
Really?
Yes, this is the most time we have ever dedicated to one episode of a Puzzling Company podcast. And although I seriously enjoyed myself, I'm tired.
The game we're going to be discussing this week is Adventure Games by Thames and Cosmos. We played all four.
Yes, currently 4 out there.
We played The Dungeon, Monochrome Inc., The Volcanic Island, and The Grand Hotel Abaddon. These games have an average game time of anywhere from like four hours.
4 to 6 hours apiece. And I said, let's play all of them.
And we played them back to back. But it was a lot of fun, and we're super excited to talk about it. Stick with us.
All right, Jared, I got to cut out a little early today. I have an interview.
An interview? You didn't tell me about that. Where at?
With Soup.
Oh, nice. I've heard really great things about the Soup Shed off of I-24. So come on down to the Soup Shed.
No, Jared. Soup is a society for the observation of unknown phenomena. They actually sent me my first case as a test. Take a look at this folder.
Why is this folder full of pictures of me?
Well, they are all about documenting the weird and bizarre. If you'd like a chance to join Soup, head on over to crackanutmysteries.com.
How did they get this picture of me in the shower?
Well, welcome back to Puzzling Company. We are now in the first section. This is kind of where we get to discuss the games that we get to play on the show. So we're going to be discussing the 4 games for Adventure Games. Like I said, as we said earlier, it'll be The Dungeon, Monochrome Inc., The Volcanic Island, and The Great Hotel Abaddon. This was a combined experience for us, around 16 to 17 hours worth of gameplay, and we did it back to back, which was a lot of fun.
But not in one day.
Correct. Oh, well, yeah. Okay, this was over like...
The course of a couple
2
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. But we basically played all this over 2 weeks. Just we'd play one and started the next one as much as we could, so on and so forth. It was a blast. I really liked these games. There was a lot of interesting elements in the adventure games. It was also something that we weren't sure about, like at first. And I don't mean that like in a super negative way. It was just a thing of this was something that we looked at and we're like, okay, these are really long experiences and they seem to have more like narrative and other factors into it. So it felt like there was gonna be a lot. And it actually turned out being like a pretty good intro into the series, as well as a really fun mechanic.
It was really cool. And I agree with you. I had my hesitancies up front as well, because I thought, is this going to be like 95% narrative? Like, what are we getting ourselves into? But I remember Dungeon being on the shelves for a while in stores, and then Monochrome came out in Volcano. I was like, okay, well, clearly these are selling. They're letting the creators continue to make these. So we teamed up again with Thames and Cosmos, and we said, we'll cover them all. And they said, okay, come on with it.
And to kind of talk about as well, when we kind of start discussing all 4 of them, so every week we talk about the things we liked about them, as well as like kind of room for improvements. That's obviously personal opinion. It's not to dog games. It is just, this is kind of a part where we get to tell why we love the games and what we thought, for us, what we thought could be improved. Hopefully no one takes that too hard. It's just an opinion.
We are here to destroy.
No. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. So let's kind of start talking about this. What do you think was very unique about these games?
I was really taken back by the format in a good way, like in a really, really good way.
Okay.
Because I think in looking around, nobody is talking about how this game functions. It moves in a way that we've never experienced before in an at-home puzzle and mystery. Can you think of anything that's even functioned a little bit like this?
We've played games that has a little bit of like a choose your own adventure element. In terms of like, it might give you multiple things you can read and pick. But this is the only game that purely goes down this like point click adventure kind of game at home.
I would describe it as if you had a big bowl and it's part choose your own adventure, part almost RPG, and part analog adoption of point and click adventures.
Yeah.
And thus the Powerpuff Girls were born.
Yes.
And like but it works.
Yeah.
It works really well. If you can imagine a paper version of a point and click adventure That's what we're talking about here. And it is just so, I'm going to use the word expansive right now because I don't want to spoil anything we're going to talk about in the likes. But if you can imagine a game where you are getting to play as a character, you're getting to make decisions, sometimes separate from your group, and it also works on a turn-based system. So you played a character, I played a character, I did stuff on my turn ended, you did stuff on your turn. Almost every other game we play, everything is just happening in real time.
Mm.
It's a very unique aspect of the game, and that's where a little bit of that RPG factor comes in. But before we get into our likes, we need to discuss something else just to understand how this game plays. So in this game, you're doing a lot of exploration, but the game makers have developed something really helpful in that helps the information and the narrative. And Zach, I want to throw that to you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so they actually offer two different ways that you can kind of get an introduction to the game as well. So they offer you an adventure book, as well as this book that kind of gives you an understanding of how to set up the game, as well as they've actually created a phenomenal app that does all of it for you digitally. So the app, as well as the books, gives you instructions on how to set up the game, the rules for if you play with 2 people, if you play with 3, if you play by yourself, you play with 4. I think in all the games it's 1 to 4 is what
Yes.
but it teaches you how to set up all the games, how do you play it. It gives you rules on how cards work, how characters work, how interacting with certain NPCs in the game work. It has a hint system in the back. And in the online element, the app does all of that and adds a narrator to help kind of
Yes.
explain. It has videos to show what it looks like. Because in the book, you have pictures to show like what the setting would look like when you set everything up. But the app will speak it to you, show you how they move it around, how it all works, so that if you don't get it, especially the first time when you're playing it, it gives you a good idea of like, okay, I can watch this video and it does a good job being precise. Like, this is how I set up, this is how I move, this is how the game will play.
Yes. It's very, very, very helpful, and it's done in a voice that is not terrible to listen to.
No, I've done this in the past about certain games. The narrator actually has emotion, and it's kind of really cool to have someone do. It's the same voice, but I like
Yes.
that it's this guy who clearly indicates like certain elements, and then
There's
versus other games where it's the classic Siri, and not Siri, but like the Google voice that has the same tone.
The cat ran across
Yeah.
the table. No, this guy had inflection.
Yep.
He cared. It was really, really well done on the app side of things. But that kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about. I realize listening to this as far, you might be still not understand what in the world you're getting yourself into when you jump into one of these games. But that will become very apparent once we jump into our likes right now. And Zach, I'll throw it to you to talk about what were our likes for this game, because for the first time in a long time, we had to really narrow this down because we had so much content. There's a lot to like about these games, but we want to hit on the big ones. What's our first one?
I really liked the characters and the multiplayer aspect of this game. Being able to so when you start the game, in all of them, if I'm not mistaken, you get 4 characters that you can
Yes.
choose from. So obviously, if you're playing 1 to 4, you can decide which character you want to be. In some of the games, the characters have different things they can do, powers, limiters, as I'm going to call them, but different abilities, things that they're smart at, things they're not, what their backgrounds in, and they're all unique from each other. So you can kind of like be like, oh, I think this like Jerome looks cool, or whatever character that you decided you really liked, you can go with and decide to pick them. As well as it kind of gives you an understanding when you play the games and you read the instructions, like, okay, my character's good at hacking things. This character's
Yes.
good at understands occult things, so on and so forth. And it was just fun to have these characters that clearly had their own like things they were good at, had their own objectives, things they were able to interact only, and the other characters couldn't
Yes.
like do it. So it felt like you had an important role in very specific things, or if you had like your own mission, whatever it was, you were trying to complete these things. It also kind of like created this element of teamwork where you had to work together on a lot of elements. Like, like an example, I might be on a personal mission and we read an entry when we checked out this bookshelf. And when I do it, Jared's character reads it, but then it says like, oh, well, are you this person?
Yes.
And Jared's not. So I go, oh, I should go check it out because my character's that person. So then I go and do it. And then the multiplayer, like it's just fun playing multiple people, but then also in some of the games, they introduce like more characters that are NPCs, but also potential characters that you get to play as.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
There's so much. It feels like a video game on your tabletop.
Yeah.
A little bit. I very rarely recommend that you play games with more than usually 2 people, just because the items that you have are limited and inevitably you're going to have people looking over your shoulder. There's not enough to do. This is a game that I feel very confident that I would say play with 2, it's fine. But if you play with 4, you might be getting a little bit more out of the experience.
Yeah, you get more, especially in some of the other games. Like I know, because I don't want to spoil too much of any of the games, but in Grand Hotel, even if you're playing by yourself, you have to play as 2 people because of a certain mechanic.
Yes.
But in that game, it actually shows you and tells you that even with 2 players, you can play with as many as you want.
Yeah, you can
like,
play with all 4 characters.
If we wanted to in that game, me and Jared could have played all 4. We only played 2 in every one of them.
Yes.
But in that game, I remember specifically, and maybe it wasn't the other ones, I just don't remember it. But in that game, it was like, hey, you should play with as many as you want because you'll be able to do more if you want to. It doesn't stop the game's experience.
No.
But you uncover more and potential like fun narrative.
Absolutely. The other thing that and you brought this up, there's just really smart opportunities for each player to have a moment.
Yeah.
Especially with the unique characters that are in play. Like Zach said, sometimes it was very clear what character needed to be doing that what, and you would have to pass that turn off to them. And they would get to do something cool. And in that way, when you left the game, you had that nobody else could do. In essence, what I'm saying is the game in its format really prevents the hijacking of the game by any one player.
Yeah.
Like we all have that one player who's usually better at puzzles that if we play a puzzle game with, we know that they're going to carry 80% of the load. That doesn't really get to play into effect so much because you can do whatever you want on your turn. You can listen to your teammate. You can screw your teammate in some interesting situations. Yep. Some really interesting things can happen between the mechanics of these different board games. And it was so much fun to play it turn-based. I will say that adds to the time of each game. But I just thought it was really well done. And I was just kind of struck by the fact that I would say, yeah, play this with 3 people, say this with 4 people. Like that might even be more fun than playing it with 2 people. And usually, like I said, Zach and I just like to play our games, me and him. That's it. But it may have been fun to pull in a couple of other more people here and see what that experience was like. Zach, what else was really cool about these games?
So yeah, the next thing we really liked was actually the exploration in this game.
It was so good.
Yeah. So the game kind of instructs you how to set up your board, right? So you might get like the very first room you start off in. So as an example, in Dungeon, you're in this jail cell. And it kind of sets up why you're in there, or kind of, gives a narrative background. But then you try to solve puzzles to potentially explore. Then you start going throughout the place and you get new tiles to kind of look through and get new puzzles to mess with, interact. And it was fun because you would go anywhere from like a small room to the entire castle, or, from the first floor of this gigantic building to the top floor, and these secret rooms and compartments and labyrinths and labs and base, volcanoes, mountains, anything you could think of, you explored. Now, I think that was one of the most interesting things about all 4 games is they were all 4 very different environments.
Yes.
Like Dungeon is, olden time. You go through all these different layers. You do monochrome ink, which is like futuristic.
There's elevators that have rules, and
you go Volcanic Island, and it's this island you're on, and as the game goes on, the environment changes. Yes. So then you have new places to explore. And in other games, it does that too. But in that game, specifically because it's Volcanic Island, might spoil a little bit what happens in the game because it's called Volcanic.
Things geologically happen.
Yes. And then Great Hotel Abaddon in that one too.
Which is huge.
You start off in a hotel room, or in like the lobby, and then you start exploring. Or you're in the dining room.
Our table wasn't even big enough for Hotel Abaddon.
Yeah, we had to adjust how we set up the board. And honestly, that happened in a lot of games. It felt like we started running out of space because there's so, like, by the time you build the whole board, if it doesn't, in the game, it tells you like when you can get rid of certain things. In some of the games, you didn't get rid of the board. So it kind of just started going like really long. Like our table, yeah, it's not that big, and it filled up like the entire table.
Have a large dining room table to play these games on.
Correct.
Or the floor. Choose the floor. But I totally agree with you. Each one is so unique. There are mechanics that play. And Zach, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't know of a game that got me more into the excitement of discovering a new space or a room more than this game. I'm looking around at some of the other games that we've played in terms of like discovery. And I don't know that many that do that. Like I'm looking at the Dollhouse right now. but you can see it all,
Yeah.
right? Like or in other games when it's like you discovered a trap door and you went into the cellar. That's great. Thank you for including that. But in the adventure games, I got to see it.
Yeah.
And then interact with that new space the same way that I would feel about an escape room.
Yeah, it's also the thing of certain games we play, right? They're more like paper product. Like example might be a box and inside it's a bunch of envelopes.
Yes.
Your exploration's the envelopes. So it kind of becomes this thing of like, you're kind of excited to see what's in the envelope, but it's an envelope.
Right.
Does that make sense? So you're kind of still at the end of the day like, okay, I know I'm going to open that cool envelope, but I know there's just gonna be things in it. And in this game, it's clearly like, okay, I have a bunch of floor tiles that I don't have any idea what that room could be like. And then we flip one over and I'm like, holy cow, that's a pretty weird swimming pool. Or, you do it and you're like, oh gosh, the volcano, or in the hotel, you've gone to certain like mysterious floors.
And it's the intersection of having to have your character in that room to interact with the things in that room with the addition of new spaces that makes this game so great.
Yeah, and also narratively was cool. Like, I would say, like, I'm going to talk about Dungeon specifically for a small second. Dungeon was fun because there's a certain room at the beginning of the game that Jared loved interacting with to the point that he kept hurting himself. But it was funny because once we started opening up more and found out what's behind all that, it was like a really interesting element of like, oh, that's what's behind that door. Or like when we started climbing up the dungeon, we eventually got to like this trap door and opened it up and looked up, and inside is this crazy environment that you're like, oh, that's what's going on.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, that's sick, or whatever it would be.
It has the most basic elements of D&D, is what I would say. Like, and don't let that scare you. I mean, like the bare bones, movement, character development a little bit in some cases.
It's also all very well explained in
Very well explained.
It's not difficult.
If
we could do it instantly and not really have any issues,
right.
It's not that bad.
But it's just the flow of all of that. It just works so well, in my opinion. It was just a real joy to experience something that different in the format. And then in addition to our last which is, I just loved the Easter eggs in this game.
There's a lot.
To the point where I would recommend that if you're going to play these games, I would play them in order, which is the dungeon, then Monochrome Inc., then Volcanic Island. And spoiler, Easter eggs don't really matter for Hotel. But we're going to talk a little bit later what our favorite games were. But the first three, there's so much fun interplay, Zach.
Yeah, the first game, I'd say the first game doesn't really have Easter eggs. It has things set up Easter eggs. Like you're like, okay, this is a weird item that doesn't get used at all.
Well, when you finish though.
Correct. It does hint at you like, you should keep this. Or
and you're like,
what?
You're like, why should I keep this? The game is over, isn't it?
And then you go into the next game, and then as you're going around, you can do like these side objectives. Essentially, you don't know it, but you do it, and it's like, oh, do you still have like 99 from the dungeon? And or whatever the card number
is. You're
is.
like, where's that box at?
And you're like, what do you mean? And then you go look, and you're like, oh, it's that item or that thing. And you're like, okay, that's kind of a cool combo of like how that would work. Or like in Volcano, to kind of tell it a little bit, Volcano is the best example of this. Volcano has a load of Easter eggs for the first two.
Yes.
I think in total there was like 1 or 2 from Monochrome in that one, but then there was like 4
there
from
was
Dungeon.
A bunch. There was so many.
There was specifically, I think the coolest Easter egg is actually a character.
Yes.
That I was like, okay, this character is either, because I can't spoil what happens. The character appears and it's someone that's very relevant in a game that we've already played.
You hear the name and Zach and I just kind of like locked eyes. We're like, what?
How's that character exist in this? Or like, how did they show up here? And I'm intrigued because this is a conversation I want to have with the people who created. Like, okay, is that who I think it is in terms of like, that's actually them? Or is this like a person that knows them or whatever?
That's how good the world building is. Like it's creating its own universe where these things are kind of like simultaneously, let's call it the AGU, the Adventure Games universe.
Yeah, because some of the Easter eggs are like cool, but you're like, okay, that's just interesting. But then there's a few that you're like, that's a really interesting Easter egg. Why, because then you almost question the game. You're like, how does, like it's the whole, like when that character got introduced, I'm like, that's like a huge bomb. If it's the character I think it is,
It just was well thought out. Like it was so cool to see that in the dungeon, they were thinking about what they were going to do in Monochrome and what they were going to do in Volcanic Island. Like, I just love that. This is going to be new for us. Zach and I went back and forth. We wrote down, I'm looking at the board where we were discussing and writing all these things down. There's one element of this game that we couldn't say was wholly alike or potentially needed room for improvement. And that is the choose your own adventure part of this game. This will make a little more sense as we start talking about some of our room for improvements, but we thought this was a unique opportunity to kind of have this middle ground and talk about it. I'll start, Zach. I'll take the negative of it, and then I'll throw it to you for the positive.
Okay.
The hardest part about this in the choose your own adventure, and this is true of any choose your own adventure, is I struggled so much with FOMO.
Yeah.
Because inevitably taking path A meant that I didn't get to take path B, which meant to me, I'm missing out on content.
Yeah.
And in all of the other games that we play, unless there's some super secret buried Easter egg that isn't really a part of the game, maybe you have to know the person that created it, we don't miss content.
Yeah.
Like we try to be as completionist as we possibly can if time permits. But this was hard for me because inevitably I felt like I was making decisions that I would either miss out or that I would potentially screw something up.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? And then in addition to that, what's the inverse?
I agree. There was definitely, like, in very specific games, I would say it didn't matter as much. In specific, that the ending was still the essential same, but like the journey was like had small changes.
Yes.
But you ended up at the same result, maybe a little bit different based on the ending. But then, like in Volcanic,
It mattered a lot.
there were like 2 or 3 very different routes that you could do. So like we played the game one way, and clearly we could play the game again 2 different ways and have 2 completely different endings. And it felt disappointing because we played it and we liked the way we chose our route. But when you look back at it, you're like, okay, we clearly did nothing with those characters, or like that environment or that element of the game. We just skipped it entirely because we went down this path.
And that was the thing. It felt like a major thread. It wasn't like some minor trail.
Correct. It was clearly like you could tell that you could go. I will say you could have mixed them. They do
Sure.
offer like, hey, do you want to like go down this path? Like, do you want to try doing this now? But I felt like that would almost throw it off though at the same time, because you would be so, especially later in the game, like so developed into this one storyline and learning the background of it. And then decide, I'm going to go complete opposite direction at the very end. I feel like it would throw it off. So it feels like you have that option, but you're almost forced to be like, if you want the full experience of one story, you should go story A, story B, story C.
Yes.
But in other games, it wasn't as bad. The things we liked about it, though, was that you got to choose a lot of things. Like specifically in Volcanic, I will say one of the coolest parts is there's actually a mechanic where you get to choose someone to do something. And that character becomes
A companion of
a
sorts.
companion, yes. And you get to introduce an NPC that you can play as. And it adds this really fun element of like, okay, now there's this new character in the play that does all these different things and adds new narrative bits, and they can have companions that help do very specific things. It was like a lot of fun because you did get to choose your path, and there was these elements of like, I get really rewarded for doing this. Like I get, if you're a completionist and want points, they have like a point system in the game. You could try to do everything perfectly to get all the points. If you wanted to, if you liked going a certain round being more like stealthy based or not, in like monochrome, you could really decide to go down one path or another. There was rewards and consequences for doing those types of gameplay.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun being like, okay, we're going to try playing it this way and see how it really hurt us or benefited us for trying to do it.
And that's the positive, right? It's options.
Yeah.
Freedom and options, giving players agency to make the choices that they want to make. That is a positive. But we just felt like that was kind of a toss-up. And to say to our listeners, know what you like. If you love the style of, escape room games where you're going to solve and do every single thing in the game, you may struggle a little bit with this. If you love the choose your own adventure and you love the narrative and you're okay with missing B so that you can do A, I don't think you'll have a problem with this. But now I want to transition into talking a little bit about room for improvements. This game had so much going for it. And with that, we felt like there were still some things that were just a little bit sticky that needed some smoothing. And Zach, why don't you kick us off with the first one?
Yeah, so the first room for improvement that we really had was actually the hint system. So the hint system is available in both one of the booklets that you get in the game as well as on the app as a help system. It does what it's supposed to do in terms of or how it would work in this game is you would get cards, right, that have numbers on them or locations.
Correct. And this is, to stop you real quick, this is kind of how the character / item inventory interactions work.
Yeah.
You combine cards that have numbers on them with locations or characters that have numbers on them.
Or other cards
in the game to
create new items.
Or events or things like that. So that's what we're referencing here.
Yes. So as an example, right, let's say we're trying to open location 705 and it says we need a specific item to do it.
Yes.
Or it kind of hints at like, you need to create this item, but you've never found it yet. So you're like, okay, I'm really stuck. I don't know what I'm supposed to combine or get to do this. So you look it up in the book and it's like, okay, well, how the book works is it goes, okay, this is a hint system of where you get the card. Like if you're looking for an adventure card, it tells you exactly where you get the adventure card and what it could combine with. And then for the location, it explains how you get the location unlocked.
Yes.
So that's kind of, but all it does is tell you the one sentence of like, oh, well, you get this adventure card from finding this location, combine it with this.
And if you don't know where that thing comes from, now you're on a treed pathway of discovering maybe more than you wanted to know.
Well, as an example, we had a dumb moment in Dungeon where we didn't realize there was a character involved. It was kind of a thing that I think I just didn't notice, that we needed to pick up a certain card at some point in the game, that we needed to move the game forward. And we didn't have it. So then we got stuck where we couldn't do anything. And it was like, okay, clearly we have every item that's possible. We've explored everything, but like something doesn't make sense. We're clearly missing an item or how to combine to get that. Or we got rid of the item, by combining it or using it on something else. So we got really frustrated. So then we started looking through the hints being like, okay, how am I supposed to open this door? Because I clearly have done everything. And then it goes, oh, you combine with this and this. And we're like, okay, well, let me look at where, that item comes from. And you look up that item and it goes, you find it at this location. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have that location open. How am I supposed to get it? And then you go back and back and back and back. And then eventually you're just down a rabbit hole where you don't have any idea.
Right.
I mean, you have an idea because it tells you where you're supposed to find it, but it's not like a tiered hint system where it's like, okay, you should do this, then this. This is more explaining how exactly you combine them. This is exactly where it is. This is the set of steps. And this is the hard part, I think, with this hint system that I have to give like kind of a understanding to the creators is how do you create this crazy tiered hint system that plays off steps and specifically doing it in order, but you could still make the argument that like it ends up being 10 words at most for most hints or less. And you're like, okay, I have still no idea. Or it doesn't explain why that makes sense. So you're just kind of like, I don't know.
If you've ever used a school book, it feels like an index.
Yes.
Oh, what is this word? I don't understand it. Go to the back of the book and it'll tell me where to look. But what's hard about that is it becomes increasingly more complex the bigger your board is.
Oh, agreed.
Because you don't know, I'll talk about at the end of Hotel Abaddon. There were a bunch of inventory cards that we had. There were probably 75 to 80 places on the board that we could interact with.
Yeah.
And I just believe that there is a more user-friendly system to help people when they get stuck. I understand, I'm sitting here and be like, I want visuals. That's a lot more paper all of a sudden in here, right? This is kind of like a bare bones, A equals B. If you got B, go to C. But I feel like for the people that got stuck and just in reading some reviews online on like Amazon and things like that, it felt like there needed to be more guidance in the hint system. The hint system's not wrong.
Yeah.
It's just not what I would call a friendly UI. Is that fair?
No, it's fair. It's also a thing that like, even from our own personal experience, we did look up a walkthrough to see where we
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that may not, like I said, it's not
we were
saying,
so stuck.
Yeah, it's also that thing of like, it's not that, like you said, the system is wrong, but it clearly, a video does it better. That I could watch someone else play it and it makes more sense.
Yes.
So it's like disappointing that we had to go that far to like make all of it connect. I think we only had that happen like once or twice that we had to really use a hint, quote unquote.
Yes.
In the first game, it was because we just forgot a card entirely that it told us to use. And then we used it again in Monochrome?
I think
Monochrome
so.
we used a hint. So yeah.
It just happens. There, you get to a point where the information isn't just clicking. Like any game, you stuck, you don't know what to do. All that we're advocating for is a quicker hint system. The other reason for that is because these games are long.
Yes.
These games are so long. And I will give them a lot of praise because they do a great job of chaptering it. If you look on the box, it says, I'm looking at Dungeon right now, and it says, This is 3 times 90 minutes. So 3 chapters, each one 90 minutes.
They
in
have
length.
good save points. They have
Good save points.
Understanding of how to
But
do them.
that time is increased by the complexity of the hint system, in my opinion.
Yeah, it can.
It can be a lot. But let's move on, Zach, because I want to talk a little bit about the inventory as a little bit of room for improvement. I felt this more in Monochrome. Monochrome is where I felt it the most, and then Volcanic Island as well. But early on, your inventory is very small.
Yes.
It's manageable. There's a really cool system where, Zach has his own inventory items. I have mine. We can switch them out. But it gets to a point in the game where, especially like I said, in those middle 2 titles, where the inventory is just too much.
Yeah.
The game doesn't either tell you to get rid of things that you don't know, or to let you know, like, hey, this is just going to be a unique scoring item that doesn't have any relevancy in the flow of the game. It became overwhelming, the options that we had, to where we reached the mid to end game. It was like we had to try 10 to 15 different things, and it became a lot to juggle.
Oh, I agree. I think the worst offender of the things you said was the scoring cards. I really disliked that we would find, like, at the end of a chapter, we would score cards. Like, there'd be cards that weren't used as puzzles, but they were rewards for getting points.
If you were playing the score.
Correct. But then they don't go away. They just sit there.
Yes.
So then by the end of the game, we have like 20 cards that don't do anything. They're just in our way. And it feels like okay, well, we already scored them. Why can't I just put them away now? Like,
Yes.
I've already scored it. I get it that if I want to check my score again later on, maybe, or something like that. And some of the cards did have a use more than like scoring it. It stayed around and actually had some beneficial thing in the gameplay. And that made sense for those cards. But there were so many cards that was like, okay, we used it, but then it never told us to get rid of it. So it just kind of sat around 80% of the game. And
I want to say that I feel like it got a lot better in Grand Hotel Abaddon.
Dungeon and Abaddon, I think, were the 2 best examples of inventory management.
But I was thinking specifically Monochrome. Like, it just got to a point where I was just like, okay, we need to pause. And did we miss some text that told us to discard? Okay, no, we didn't. It just became a lot. Again, we were 2 people, not 4. So in a 4-player game, that gets split up a little bit more. But still, I'm thinking about it in the context of a 4-player game. Then you're looking at your friend. You may be trading them. You're constantly looking over your shoulder to see if somebody's holding on something that you may need. It seemed like there could be a way to really minimize, especially with the length of these games, that might help timing a little bit as well. But I want to move on into now what you were talking about, which is the score system.
Yeah.
You and I like score systems. A lot of people do not like them. I don't think that's wrong or bad. Some people are there for playing a game as long as they want to.
Having fun. They don't want
having fun.
The competition aspect. Yeah.
And I like that. If you like score systems and that's fun to you, roll with it. More often than not, we like the score system.
Agreed.
But what was hard about this score system, and what was a little bit frustrating for us, is it felt like you had to play an almost perfect game to score in the highest tier.
Correct. You basically did have to.
Right. And we felt that a little more in some than in other, but it was hard because we would go back at the end of the game and be like, oh man, I think in every single game, I think only in one game did we make the highest tier.
Volcanic, I think we did get the final tier, but all 3 other games. In Dungeon, we missed it by like 3.
Right.
In Monochrome, it was like 1 or 2.
Yes.
Hotel was like 4. But then on Volcanic, I think we got exactly the amount we needed to complete the quote unquote max tier.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was difficult because obviously it's a game. There's mechanics standing in your way to knock points out of you. And we could go deeper into that, but we won't. But I struggled with that a little bit because as someone who does enjoy the game from kind of like a high achievement standpoint, like when we would go back and work through how could we have achieved max points, it seemed like there almost had to be, I don't know if luck is the right term, but it felt like so much was out of your control in order to score the way that we wanted to score.
I think in some of the games, it wasn't that bad. very clearly, I think some of them were like, okay, we just made mistakes in terms of we thought we couldn't keep, like we couldn't buy everything, we couldn't do this, whatever. I will say though, and specifically Hotel was super frustrating because the reason we didn't win the top prize was because of an element of a mechanic that required you to not stay in the same room. It made sense afterwards. We're like, okay, we were supposed to technically do this, but the issue is that if you didn't instantly understand that you were supposed to do this when you first enter that room,
then you had no chance of scoring.
You literally lost because you basically got stuck with the mechanic that basically went, okay, every time you stay in here, you're losing. And it was really frustrating me at the end to be like, okay, literally that's because we didn't instantly understand that we insta lost the top tier.
Right. And that's the hard play again between the score system plays so much into your inventory.
Yeah.
More often than not, a lot of your points are coming from your inventory or your character interactions, and mix that in with kind of the choose your own adventure. What we are saying is we recommend playing this game, not necessarily having score as hold your score lightly and you'll enjoy this game more.
Yeah, I think in this game, it only really bothered me because of specifically the mechanic that stopped us and us just not realizing it or like understanding that that's what was supposed to happen.
Sure.
And the other games, I felt like the score didn't matter as much. It was more on us. Like we were just intrigued to be like, okay, that's how we got that.
I still don't. The scoring system in the volcanic island, even though we maxed it, I'm still like, I felt like we missed.
We missed. I felt like we missed.
I felt like we missed so much in that game, but hey. You know, there were a lot of pathways in that game.
That's true.
A lot of pathways. Last thing we want to do here, and again, we want to be able to dig in more and more in this, but we want to talk about the unique factors. We're going to give one unique factor for each of the 4 games that we would play. I'll kick it off. Dungeon. I want to say you should start with Dungeon.
Oh, yes.
Don't
100%.
Don't jump into Monochrome or Volcanic, even if the themes look a little more enticing, without playing Dungeon. One is because of the Easter eggs, but 2, I just feel like you get a better foundational onboarding experience from Dungeon than Monochrome and especially Volcanic kind of throw you in the deep end a little bit. And then you could almost make the argument that if you were going to recommend a second game to start on, I would probably say the Grand Hotel.
Yeah, especially since at least Grand Hotel doesn't have any Easter eggs that throw it off.
I would start either one of those places, but I think the best part about Dungeon, and correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, was just the choices. We laughed so hard at there's a health mechanic.
Oh, yes.
In the dungeon, and we gave each other so much crap and laughed so hard just about the things that happened in that game.
Oh, Jared loved walking into this one trap over and over, thinking that it would somehow change the effect. And then you also, in this game, which I liked to a degree, was that you could pick who did something.
Yes.
So Jared, of course, playing the character who was supposed to have the biggest brain, decides to throw this gigantic dude down a small hole and see what happens.
It felt like a physical strength.
Well, I hurt myself, Jared. Okay, so that wasn't funny. Do you think I liked losing 2 health because you decided to throw a big man down hole? Anyways, I'm still frustrated.
I have no regrets. Let's go to Monochrome. Zach, what did we really like about Monochrome?
I really liked that there was actually kind of a forced teamwork mechanic. So in other games, you can work together, you can trade cards. But in this game, you had specific things that were only to your character, but then also this game introduced limits. And what I mean by that are like, I'm going to call them like debuffs or limits that made it to where your character actually at the beginning of the game couldn't do certain objects. Like,
they could,
you could, but there was a mechanic in the game that wasn't health, but it was alarms.
Yes.
So you would, if you did something that you weren't supposed to, alarm would go off instantly for doing it.
Yes.
So because you could set the alarm off naturally throughout the game doing certain things. But if you decided to instantly do something as your character that was against what your deep, like if it said okay, this character can't hack the computer or whatever, as an example, if Jared had that card that says can't do that and he went and did it, he instantly set off the alarm.
Yes.
Which then caused more issues. So, but it was fun because it made us be like, okay, I can't do that. Jared, you have to do it.
So if you like trolling your teammates, Monochrome Inc. is the ultimate game for you.
Yes. It was funny because at very specific points in the game, it was like, okay, Jared, I literally can't do anything. I need you to do it. And because Jared and I do this in games, sometimes we notice some, especially after we play Dungeon, there are consequences to certain choices.
And stuff that you sometimes can't undo.
Correct. So what would happen is after playing that, we went into Monochrome being like, okay, there's consequences, which there is to a degree. But we'd be like, Jared's like, oh, I don't want to talk to those people. And I'm like, well, I can't. I physically can't. So you're going to do it, buddy. And you're going to have to like it. So that was fun.
For Volcanic, I would say we just really enjoyed the culmination of Easter eggs, as well as kind of the dynamic board
Yes.
we were playing with.
Oh, it was fun. The board ever changed. I mean, in all the games, the board like builds, but in this game, it actually changed a ton.
Changed so much. It was really cool.
But then the Easter eggs, like we talked about earlier, it had a bunch from Dungeon, a big narrative one from Dungeon, as well as I think 1 or 2 from Monochrome. I think we actually didn't get one of them from Monochrome. I think it was down a different pathway that we didn't choose.
Yes.
But it was interesting reading through they're like, here's all the Easter eggs. And it was like a list.
It was hefty.
We're like, oh, we caught these, but we didn't get these. I wonder how you would have gotten them.
Yeah. So all of that is to say, like, again, if you're going to play these games, which I recommend you do, they're very different, very unique. And there's a lot of financial value for your time.
Oh, yeah.
Like these games, I think retail for around $20 and you're going to get 4 to 5 hours out of each of them.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm saying is you would need to start with the Dungeon, then play Monochrome, then play Volcanic, or just start at the Grand Hotel Abaddon, which is the newest. But for Abaddon, the really unique factor of there was it was my favorite story because in this game, you don't really miss out on a lot.
No.
There's no choose your own adventure that doesn't get you to the same ending.
Correct. There's one decision at the very end that changes how the ending goes.
Yes.
But we knew like the game tells you like, yeah, you don't want to do that. So you kind of like when it comes up, we're like, okay, yeah, we want to make sure that doesn't happen. But the rest of the game, I also liked in that game, there were personal missions. So there was like side objectives that were like important to your character and made you feel like you had your own role.
And helped your score.
It was fun being like rewarded for trying to complete like, and at first it was funny because we had this narrative bit that was like, oh, someone could potentially not be a good guy. So we thought it was maybe they were talking about us. So it was funny being like, I joked with Jared acting like I was the bad guy. So every time I got like a new character card, I would hide it from me like, oh yes, interesting. I don't want to murder my friend. Incredible.
It was a high sus moment.
Agreed.
Very much. But yeah, those are what we would say. Again, this is really cool. I'm excited to play more of these in the future. I will need a little break because of the countless hours that we have.
My only advice against these games is don't play them back to back. And I don't mean that in like a negative. I am so excited to take a break only because we literally played all 4 of them like within 2 weeks and just back to back to back, which it's fun mechanic, but playing 17 hours worth of it.
I will be super excited to play some other stuff. And then come back to their new one. And when the 5th installment comes out, I will be very excited. It'll be fun. I'll be very excited to come back. But that's really going to wrap us up for our first segment. We've got Puzzles to the People coming at you next.
Solve puzzles, write reviews, win prizes. It's time for Puzzles to the People.
Hey, Zach.
Jared, I'm not falling for this again.
Oh, so what? Now you don't trust me?
Correct. I don't trust you.
Well, then do I have a game for you?
What are you talking about?
Floor 13 from CU Adventures. It's the story of a company with too much trust.
But I don't trust you.
Well, Zach, trust me on this. You need to head on over to cuadventures.com and play Floor 13 or their other game, The Lost Temple, and you will not be disappointed. Well, welcome back to Puzzling Company. Thanks for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Here in Puzzles to the People, we do a host of different things. Today, I have a question that hasn't really occurred to me before.
Okay.
We've experienced this in other games, but we just haven't gone down this rabbit hole. And that is the notion of the avatar in a game.
Okay.
No, I'm not talking about a short child with airbending capabilities, nor am I talking about a slightly older teenager who starts off with water abilities and then saves the world.
I feel like that's a reference to Avatar: The Last Airbender.
It is.
I like that.
What I'm talking about is the role that you're playing in the game.
Okay.
In many of the games that we play, we're just us, right? We're Zach and Jared. As we've talked about, we have a lot of different societies that we belong to that we solve mysteries for.
I've saved the world like 9 times at this point. Like, not a huge deal.
No big deal. But in a rarer few games that we have played, we get to be somebody else.
Yeah.
That happened in these games.
Mm-hmm.
We got to take on the role of a character, and as a result, that changes things. My question to you is, first of all, what's your preference? When you're playing an at-home puzzle and mystery game, do you like being you and maybe some of the realness, ARG, if you want to call being yourself as being part of the ARG. Do you like that? Or are the more fun games for you when you get to play as somebody else with defined characteristics? Not just saying like, now you're Detective Zach, but now you're Detective Clancy, blah, blah, blah.
Sure. I think it depends on the game. I will say adventure games is probably one of the best in terms of that I enjoyed playing the character in like in Abaddon and in Dungeon and in Volcanic. They all Monochrome, it had its own element with like the role that you had that you could do certain things,
But
I
not
felt
as
like,
much.
But like the character development was less,
Yes.
to a degree. But like in Volcanic, it mattered. In Abaddon, it really mattered with your personal quest or your personal mission. It was really fun to be like, okay, this is what this character wants to achieve, and then I could achieve it. And there was like a narrative like reward for completing that and achieving my mission. In Dungeon, it was really fun because the narrative kept blowing up, and you're like, oh, I'm a part of this group, and oh my gosh, that person turns out to be that guy, and the reveals and the twists. It felt rewarding because I tried putting myself in the shoes of like, oh, that's that friend of mine for so long. Oh my gosh, this happened, or whatever. I think in general, though, I like being myself because I enjoy being. It depends on the game. This is like it's hard. I'd say some of my favorite games I play as a character. Like in video games, I play as
you have
it's my character, but they have their own story. They have their own life. I build them to be like in Final Fantasy as an example. I have I'm a cat boy. I know, weird. I don't know, but that's my character. He's changed. He's grown over time. He has these interactions with other players and NPCs, and they play around him. WoW's kind of the same, like the stories around you to a degree. But it was fun because I like being able to like almost not be myself and kind of like be this in those types of games, being like a fictional character and have all these powers and abilities and things that maybe I don't have in real life. But when it comes to puzzle games at home, I like being myself because a lot of times it gives you that reward of like I'm the one who saved the day, or I'm the hero. Depending on the game, like when we play games like, Witchery Spell from like Dark Park, or we play like Site of Curiosity, some of those, it's fun being like, oh, I'm this important person that they've called upon me, that I'm so smart and handsome and beautiful, of course, but that I can save the day. And that's a fun element. As well as work with like you. It's really fun to be like, okay, Zach and Jared saved the world.
Yeah.
That's fun to me. But it depends on the game. That's always a hard question when we ask these things, is it's never 100% like, I only like Avatar games, or I only want to be myself. It depends on how well I think the narrative matters.
Yes.
Because I think in games that narrative matters a ton with characters, avatars can be an awesome experience. But when I feel like narrative doesn't matter as much with characters, or they don't have roles, then it's like, why? Why have these characters? Why can't it just be me?
I think it is a struggle for me between, in the world where we are playing as ourselves, there's a level of personalization there.
Yes.
Like when we played Soup, everything was addressed to us.
Yes.
That's cool. That makes it alive and real. But the trade-off for that is when I get to play as a character, those have been some of my favorite interactions. In my opinion, it's a personalization versus interaction. Mm-hmm. So the games that I'm thinking of that you and I have played, like there's been a couple of Deckscape games that we've played where we got to take on roles. There's been a couple of Unlock games where we've taken on some roles. We did it in today. And I like that because now there's either a fresh mechanic or a fresh interaction that I don't know if it's super possible if it's just you and me.
Yeah.
Most of the unique interactions just come from, like the items that we have or the things that we're reading. So I think lately, and this isn't always, but games like this just make me realize how much I really do enjoy getting to play as a character that is not myself, pretending to be somebody that has traits or powers or abilities or even unique items that are associated with them that I wouldn't. But it is two different styles of game. I think you're right to point that out.
Yeah.
And I would say experience both, but definitely don't just experience one. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you miss out on one.
I think some of the most interesting ones actually involve both to a small degree.
Ooh, tell me about that.
Okay, so I'm going to specifically talk about Society of Curiosities. Okay. I like when they introduce characters that have interactions with you.
Sure.
That is the closest you can get to both. In terms of, or we can make an argument in games where like a new character comes in that you can play as them. in Volcanic, it introduced that to a degree where like I had a character, but then a new character comes in that I get to play as, and that was like an interesting element. But like in Society of Curiosities, like Maddox Lost Treasure, in that game, it's us being these like people that are in our office or our homes being able to help solve and lead this ground team. But then there were unique NPCs that we got to interact with that had their own stories and background and their own traits. And it was fun being able to discuss it with them because it gives me that interaction of someone that's not me, who is a character that can introduce new things that is pretty realistic. But then it's still at the end of the day, like me doing the thing.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this.
Because in some games we don't have that, right? Like it's a thing of it's just us reading paper and then there's not an interaction. It's just me doing it by myself.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but you're right. That is very unique and engaging. Same thing with Space Corp.
Yeah.
I felt the same thing. But let me ask you this. Does it change the enjoyment of the game at any point based on whether you're playing yourself or an avatar? So let me give you an example based on what you've already said. You said that for a lot of the games where you play yourself, it's a super high at the end to say like,
we did it.
We did it. Like the actual person who is Zach Boffman did it.
Yeah.
Is that different when you're like, when we just played adventure games, was your winning lower because you were playing a character? Like, was there less excitement because of that?
I think it depends on the ending. I will say specifically in Hotel, I felt it the most being super rewarding because there was personal missions that were like narrative bits of like side, quote unquote, side content, things you needed to achieve, but like were mostly per points. But was like, your character is this person, has these abilities, who these traits, who they have a goal.
Yes.
You align with them. They want to, see this person. They need to do this thing. They need to find this, find that. And then being able to like find those items and try to solve the mystery of it. And then getting the narrative reward at the end being like, congratulations, you're going to get a huge narrative dump to why you like your character. And that was like very rewarding, being like, cool, my character got a resolution for what they were trying to achieve in this hotel. That was like my big Zach did it.
Sure.
Right. And then the ending, it's still cool because we're like, we did it as a team. But then it's like that element of like me doing it doesn't, I feel like it's less, but my reward for that was earlier in the game when I completed my thing. So I think it happens a little bit in these games. Like it's still fun being like, we did it, like as a team with our characters. But I feel like specifically giving characters, like if you give characters like their own resolution, where it's like for them to be like, they did it.
Yes.
And have like a cool reward, like a ceremony or reward for doing that. I like that a lot. But when it doesn't matter as much, then yeah, I would say, at least in my opinion, it doesn't matter as much if I'm an avatar.
For me, it ends better when I'm me and starts better when I'm an avatar.
Oh, yeah. No, that makes sense.
Because when I start off a game as me, I know me.
Yeah.
There's not much to learn or gain or explore about myself.
But completing things and learning about the experiences you're interacting with and then having that reward of like, you did it.
Right. At really the end. But then when I'm an avatar, well, I've got a backstory to read.
You get to learn about yourself.
I've got unique traits that I need to like strategically think about how I'm going to use.
But then you end and you're like, okay, now.
Yeah. But then it's like, but then it's back to being me.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh.
I agree. No, that's a good way to put it. I think definitely Avatar's better beginning, at least experience at the beginning, learning everything and understanding and getting familiar. And then at the end, it's better if it's you because you get like a, woo, I did it.
Yes.
That's cool.
Last question for you.
Cool.
Is immersion affected by either of these things? And I guess what I'm asking is there more immersion in a game when you're playing as yourself, or is there more immersion when you're playing as a character, or does that not bear anything on immersion, in your opinion?
I think it does matter. I think Avatar games actually can give more immersion.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
The reason why I say that is if it's a good character and it has their own traits and stuff, you get more involved in like trying to be your character. And I felt like in the games we played, it was fun being like we joked about it a lot in Dungeon, but like we did a lot in Volcanic. It was fun being my character and like joking around what my character would do.
We did have a lot of fun.
And then having the other character come in, like that was like a very fun immersive thing that we joked about a lot. But then when we play other games, like we make that up for ourselves to the same degree, but it's still just us. Like we just joke. It's just joking as friends to each other. So I find it interesting because in certain game, like like Grand Hotel, Dungeon, Volcanic, and some in Monochrome. I think just in my honest opinion, in Monochrome, I didn't feel it as much with the character because I felt like their character development wasn't really there. You're just characters who have different abilities. But specifically, like in Grand Hotel and in Volcanic, it was really cool being like, my character does this. Oh, I can do these things. I achieved this. There's character development. I'm immersed. My character does this. I joke that I'm playing the like 11-year-old, character with my dog companion, and Jared is playing this young teenager, like joke or college kid being like, you're going to stay with me, young man, and joking about like that interaction. Like that was a lot of fun being like I think some of that's on us more than it is the game doing it. I think when it's in person, I think the game has to do such a good job of drawing you in. I almost want to say, maybe this is a really wrong take, but it's just my opinion. I feel like in games where you need to be immersed and it's on your character, the game has to build the world so well that you want to be in it. I think in Avatar games, it gives you a better introduction of like jumping into the world with the character and trying to learn it. But if the game doesn't develop it really well, it becomes really bad.
So you're saying there's more risk in an Avatar game?
Yes. And I only mean that because I could get disappointed. I think in at home ones, it's almost like an element that like you like. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm going to say it for me. In some games that we get in the at home space that are for me and about me as a character, I know it's just me, so I don't have to get immersed as much. But it's like if the game does a good job world building, then I want to be more involved and think about like, oh, the narrative's changing this. But then at the end of the day, it's still me. So like at some point, it's like on me to keep that immersive element.
Sure.
And it's the same in Avatar to a degree, but if the Avatar game does a good job of keeping that character building and understanding and learning more about them, it was really fun being like Yu Hung or whatever my character's name was in Abaddon and learning more about my character and understanding why they're there and getting more, and they have abilities, and it was really unique doing that.
So it's almost what I hear you saying is it's almost the difference. When you're playing a character game, it's almost like reading a book. The immersion comes from the engagement of this character who you are simultaneously puppeting, but you don't have the self-knowledge of yourself. So that's engaging.
Correct.
If it comes down to playing as you, well, that's more like playing a game. Yeah. Because here you are, you have an infinite world of possibilities. You know yourself, the game is in front of you. And then it more depends on the elements and the world that is surrounding it, because it's not so much learning about yourself, but learning about the narrative or the people around you, the environment, so forth and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really weird. Just in thinking about this before we did the episode, we talked about more so NPCs when we talked about Space Corp. But I just always wondered what's the preference? Why does one work more than the other? Why take this shot? Because I think games like adventure games are for sure the minority in the space that we cover. There's much more of a alternate reality game pool to center you as yourself as the main character. And games like these just feel like a fun departure from what the norm is in our space.
I almost feel like sometimes it might even be more work to try to make like a world.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, and I'm not saying that like in a dumb way, like, oh, well, obviously if it's just for me, it's easier to just personalize it and then it's the same material to a degree, but you just send it to Detective Zach. But I mean, like I said, very clearly in Abaddon, I really appreciate that my character mattered and the world mattered. And it's also a thing of, we played an escape room, and I don't want to rant too much about this, but it's just an adjacent space. We played an escape room where there were roles, right? Where you play as an avatar where your character's like, you are this guy. You have a secret objective that is this. Don't let the others interact with it. But it was fun because we hit it for a bit, but then at the end of the game, it didn't matter.
Right.
So then like, why is there roles? Right. And it could be the same thing with Avatar games. If there's an Avatar game where it's like, you get to be this character, but then at the end of the game, it didn't matter that I was a character.
Yeah.
Why does it exist?
Fair.
So that's like where it really hits me is like, if the character is important and matters and there's development and narrative that plays with it and the world really plays with it and has interactions, it's super rewarding. But if that role does not matter at all, don't put it in.
I think that's a great way to close out the segment. The final word, the definitive stamp. We're putting it down.
That's Zach's stamp of approval on Avatar versus non-Avatar games.
Well, hang with us. We've got questions for creators coming at you next.
There are some awesome people who make the puzzles we love to solve. This is Questions for Creators.
Dude, I played the best game last night.
Jared, I thought we played all our games together.
Well, traditionally we do, but this game was designed to be played by yourself. It's called Box One, and it's a new game from Neil Patrick Harris and Theory 11.
Jared, I'm hurt. What am I supposed to just believe that there's clearly this made up story of a game that's meant for only one person? And you couldn't even come up with something more clever than just Box One. Okay, you know what? I'm done. Call me when there's a Box Two.
Well, if you're not salty and you're looking for a truly awesome single-player experience, head to your local Target to pick up Box One. If you don't have or know what Target is, beg Angela Lawson Scott to ship you a copy internationally.
Well, welcome back to Puzzling Company. We are now in the final section of the show that is questions for creators. In this part, we get to talk to the amazing people who help create or contribute to the games that we get to have on the show. And today we get to talk to an amazing person who helps contribute to making the adventure games. I don't want to tell you too much about them. We're going to let them introduce themselves and get to talk to you. So tell us your name and then tell us about kind of the creation of these series or the games that you're a part of.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name's Matthew Dunstan. I'm originally from Australia. I was born in Sydney. For the last 10 years or so, I lived in the UK. I studied there for my PhD. And during that time, I started designing games. And now I live in the Czech Republic in Prague. And the kind of games I make are a very wide range of sort of tabletop board games. So these include kind of strategic games, some sort of larger civilization-style games, and then more recently, a lot more narrative games such as the adventure game series, which I know we're talking about now, and also Echoes from Ravensburg, which is also a new sort of audio mystery game. So I'm sort of getting into that kind of thing now.
So we also know that you are a chemist that's working on some really cool things. Would you tell us briefly some of the projects you're working on in that? But also, I'm interested in how your profession plays into your game creating.
Yeah, I think they're very complementary. So yes, I did a PhD in materials chemistry, and actually up until now, I'm still working as a material chemist at the University of Cambridge, working on environmental kind of technologies, carbon capture, lithium-ion batteries, and this sort of thing. And for me, I think the kind of analytical mind that you need for science is very much akin to the kind of analytical mind you need to design games. It's kind of interesting that I now design narrative games, but I come at it much more from a sort of a systems perspective rather than a narrative or a story perspective. So my analogy is that in science, we're trying to discover something about the natural world, something about how the world works and the systems that are out there. And you do experiments to kind of glean these small snapshots of how things work. And then you try and put a lot of these snapshots together to get a bigger picture of what's going on. And in game design, you're kind of doing the same thing. It's not exactly the same, but I like to think that out there are all these games that kind of already exist. There's all these different ways that people can interact with each other, or people can interact with a game, or vice versa. And it's just our job as game designers almost to discover it. It's not exactly true. Of course, it doesn't exactly work like that. But when you make a new prototype, that's kind of like an experiment. You'll test it with people. You'll make some observations. Did that work? Was it fun? What broke? What was interesting? And then you'll iterate and you'll do another experiment and you'll get another snapshot of that kind of mechanistic system. Like, does it work? Is it interesting? What's the crucial part of it? If I change this knob, what happens to this thing over there? And then over enough times doing that, then hopefully you gain an understanding of what's going on, and maybe you can make the best game from those pieces. So I think it helped a lot in terms of that way of thinking about it for me, and thinking of it like cause and effect, like systems, because ultimately games need to deliver on that really basic level of why, like, how can I do something and why am I going to do something, like cause and effect, and understanding how to give that to players in an interesting way is really important. The only other kind of thing I would say also that is on a much more practical level is that in academia and during PhD, you have to be very used to sort of, you don't really have a boss. You have to teach yourself everything mostly, and you don't know what you're doing most of the time. And you're also changing what you're doing a lot. You know, like if you want to perform a particular experiment you never performed before, well, you go off and talk to somebody who knows something about it, and you hopefully learn it and you try it out. but that might be completely different to something you've done the next day, and it changes. So you're constantly learning and multitasking. I think that kind of way of working is very akin to how you work in games. It's not this linear process. It's not a process where you just put in the time and then you put one brick on top of each other and then, you finish with a house or something. It's going and talk to people about how something worked for them and trying different things and juggling projects and people. And I think, it's not unique to academia either, or in scientific research. A lot of other professions do that, but it was very good training for me to kind of be able to transition into designing games full time.
So we really enjoyed the format of this game. So can you tell us kind of if you were influenced by point and click adventures and kind of how that played into it, if it was?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad to hear that, because for Phil and I, so Phil Walker Harding is the other co-designer of the game, when we sat down and wanted to design the game, like a touch point for us was our shared experience of playing these kind of digital point and click adventures, and to a lesser extent, choose your own adventure books as well from when we were younger. I was a huge Lone Wolf fan, for example. Maybe a lot of US listeners may or may not know it. It was more in the UK, but in any case, for me, it was the series Myst and Riven. Actually, Riven, weirdly enough, is more remembered to me. Maybe I was slightly too young for Myst, I think, and somehow I think Riven was the main entry point into that series, which I know isn't quite right, but that's what I still remember now anyway. And yeah, I just loved the open world of it. I liked the freedom that it let you choose how you wanted to attack a problem. And I think there is an analogy to the escape rooms I like, for example, the ones usually that are quite open and where you work on things in parallel and you have to kind of work out how a particular element works with another. It's not a serialized kind of experience. And these kind of point and clicks gave you that same sort of feeling. And I think we wanted to take that. We always talk about this open adventure game. That was like a term we used a lot when we were developing it. We wanted that same sort of openness and freedom to choose how you're going to attack the different problems, or not only that, but to make new connections that we weren't telling you that things were connected. And those kind of amazing aha moments where you're like, you have two separate things in the game and then they'll actually work together. And the fact that you did that, the game didn't kind of tell you that, it didn't set it up that way. It just sort of gave you this sort of smorgasbord of locations and tools, and you kind of use your own initiative and how you're going to use it. So, which of course point and clicks were sort of doing that from the very start. And yeah, we wanted to bring that into the tabletop role, because at the time we didn't think that there were that many games that were doing that. There were games that had a very strong story and had sort of a mystery that you had to solve, but they were very much, there's one mystery, and there weren't many cases where you would get the information at your own kind of leisure. Like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective probably is the best historical example of getting bits of information in a random order and kind of the players directing how they get that information. So that was also, I think, definitely an influence. So it's nice to hear that it has sort of survived, because the designing and development process is a very long one, and you just hope that you haven't kind of stamped out the thing that inspired you at the start. So looks like we did okay.
Tell us a little bit about the logistical challenges that come with this game. There's so many options, so many places to interact with things. What makes that so difficult but so important to create a game with so many logistics?
Yeah. Wow, it's quite a bit to unpack, really. I mean, the first thing to say is actually the first two games in the series, the Dungeon and Monochrome Inc., Phil completely did the Dungeon himself, and I did Monochrome Inc. myself. We found, and I think we're finding still, that you can't work on these things collaboratively very well, or at least at the very early stage, because you're kind of holding everything in your head. So often the process starts with one of us, or in those times we just made the full scenario. We wrote it out in English. I grabbed screenshots from like Prey, I think, the video game or something. So if some of the locations look a bit similar, that's probably why. And Phil is actually a bit of a better graphic designer than me, so he was able to kind of have some rudimentary artwork. But the prototype that we made is not so different from the game itself. We had this huge Word document, which was effectively the book, with all the entries and everything like that. And we had cards that were all the different things. But then from that point, all of that then gets translated into German, because this is developed with Cosmos. They're a German-based publisher, or at least the kind of parent company is German, and they're always released in German first. So the English version come out about a year later, and so they translate it in German to playtest themselves and with all their kind of target groups and things like that. And there's a lot of back and forth. They'll give us feedback in English. We'll redo our English prototype, then they'll retranslate it. And when they were kind of happy with the kind of underlying mechanisms and the puzzles and all that kind of flow, then it goes into sort of a ghostwriting stage. So they employ a ghostwriter who writes only in German and will sort of take our text, which does have narrative in it, and it's not, but sort of punches it up, I guess, is probably the point. You know, neither Phil nor I are strictly writers. I certainly am quite happy that somebody else is kind of making it a little bit more interesting to listen to or to read. But we never see that. Once it kind of gets to that point, we don't see it anymore. Like all the ghostwriting is done in German without us kind of knowing. We sort of trust them in the process and all that kind of editing. All the illustration work, there's a lot of art in the game. For kind of a small game, there's a lot of, there's 20 location cards in each thing, which is quite a large artwork. And it's not just artwork, it's quite detailed artwork. Often, you have to have a lot of direction given to the illustrator to make sure that they include particular details. Sometimes there are even visual puzzles in the game, which means you have to also be very careful about what's going on. So that's an extra thing. And then hopefully that all comes together in the product. It comes out in German. Of course, another part is they have to record voice acting. I'm not sure if you played it with the app, which has voice acting in it. And of course, they have to record all of that, and all of that happens. And then it comes out of Germany, and then it goes over to the English partner to Cosmos in the US, for example, or US UK. I'm not sure exactly which branch does it, but then they have to translate everything, and they have to redo all the voice acting, and they have to kind of check that there are sometimes there are like some things that creep in that don't make sense in one language versus another, or ways that people think. So those were the kind of the process at the start. So you could see like the kind of heft of that work. Fast forwarding a little bit to how we're working now, because we're currently working on the 7th one, for example. Actually, the 5th and 6th ones are out in German, not in English yet. So we're on to the 7th one behind the scenes, and we have a pretty good way of working now, which is Cosmos will come to us often with a theme that they'd like to see in the line. Usually it's some sort of trope. And actually a good example of this is the Grand Hotel Abaddon. So that was the first one where we started working with this particular process. So they came to us with a theme. In fact, actually this one, it was probably a bit of both of us. I think we wanted to do a kind of a ghost story kind of theme as well. And now Phil and I split the parts between us often. So I think for Grand Hotel, I did the first part and the third part, and Phil did the second part. We still don't know if that's the most efficient way, because actually for the person who comes in on the second part, they don't have to just only play the things in the first part. They have to kind of understand all these, like often you have some open threads that are here. Like, I've still got this item. We have to figure out what we're going to do with that item. It's very much you're building it as you go along. We don't always have the full thing in our heads when we sit down to start writing it, because that's not how either of us think. I think we have an overall narrative, and this actually was the first one where we sat down before we started it at all. We knew where the story was going. We knew what the kind of beats were going to be. We knew roughly how we're going to split it into 3 chapters. And then it's about kind of fleshing out that world and fleshing out all the puzzles and things like that. And then, of course, even with that, you go through various iterations, and then, as I said, it goes through all these kind of translations and back and forth and et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, all of it can't be done also without, so Michael Sieber-Blaska and Killian Voss are the 2 people at Cosmos, who are kind of the 2 people on this project, pretty much full time on it, I think, within Cosmos, as I understand. And it's so much work on their side as well, from the like playtesting and editing and helping design. Michael helps. He's sort of an RPG, has an RPG kind of background, and so is very interested in the narrative kind of storytelling and kind of what's possible. I think that covers it. It's still imperfect. It's a work in progress. Like how to most efficiently. It's a game in itself. How to figure out how to most efficiently make these things, and also you don't ever want it to be too smooth, because if it gets smooth, then probably we're going to start making boring things. So we're always trying to do something new, but of course that just produces new problems to solve.
So can you kind of talk to us a little bit like why you decided to do the chapters in the game? Some games it's a full experience. It's an hour, multiple hours, untimed. But why in this game did you go with the format of making a game that involved like 3 chapters?
It's an interesting question. I think firstly I should say that Cosmos already had this kind of format with Exit. They had the box size, and in Germany it's box size is very important in the tabletop industry. So there are a lot of, I mean, it's a bit like big box stores in the US who have these kind of displays, and they have a certain, like, the shelves are all kind of the same size. And so you often see games hit the same sort of size. In Germany, they sell a lot of games, not necessarily in kind of, like toy stores. They sell them in department stores, in bookshops. And this kind of smaller format is it's just very well known. And so I think they knew they had to hit that box size, basically. They saw the product into that. But actually, the kind of interesting thing is once you have that box size, there are sort of limits in terms of what you can put in that box in terms of components. But actually, the great thing about the adventure games is it's quite component light. So I think Cosmos sort of went with, well, what can we put in the box? We can put this, really, big story, big experience in this small box and hit the price point that we want. And for them, I don't think it was ever a question of not putting in all that they could or that they could afford. For us, I think we always had, I've worked on a few, so this wasn't the first. It's sort of funny also the other thing that happens in the tabletop world, because you're not a publisher, you'll make a game, and the ones that were released are not always in the order that you made them in. So actually the adventure games came after my first narrative game, which will come out next year. And in that, I learned the kind of, all the people who are narrative people who listen to the podcast are going to be like, oh, of course, 3-act structure. Like, everyone knows that, But I didn't know that, or at least that wasn't the way I thought. And I discovered that in that first project. And I think I brought that in definitely into this experience, because it just helps you with that narrative side. It simplifies also the kind of just the how you play, because we try and make it so that you get rid of some things between the parts. So it's not too overwhelming. If it was like one huge open experience, then you just have too many things that you'd have to be worrying about. And you need those, as you said, those kind of bottlenecks to kind of cut those things off, just to make it a bit simpler for players. And I think the last thing that was that in the tabletop world, that kind of like 1 hour playtime or 1.5 hour playtime is very usual to kind of put on a box. So we found that, well, we had these experiences that were like, I don't know, 3 to 4 hours or something like that. But people don't really play like that. Or we wanted to give the option that if you wanted to play for an hour each night, you could. So we made sure that, there was an easy way that you could kind of save. Now, of course, it doesn't always happen like that. Another example is like time stories, which I'm not sure if we covered on the podcast or not. But that is also kind of episodic, and you kind of play in chapters. And you always say like, oh, you can save it and come back to it. And what always happens, or at least in my case, was that we'd always be playing at 2 a.m. on our third run trying to solve it or something, because you just want to keep going. But we wanted to give people the option. It's still a kind of, for Cosmos also, it's very important that it's a family game. It's something that can be played in families. And of course, they're going to consume games in a slightly different way to, you or I, perhaps. So yeah, those are all the kind of things that we're into trying to think about. And of course, we've experimented with that with the Volcanic Island was in 4 parts. We're working on some different ways in which to sort of present those parts that could be even more different. But yeah, I think it's hopefully worked so well so far.
Tell us a little bit about what is the future of adventure games. It seems very successful so far. Is there anything that you can tell us about future games coming out, or maybe different plays on the format that you already have in existence?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm pretty sure I could talk about the 5th and 6th one because they're sort of publicly available in German. So the 5th one we weren't actually involved with. It's called the Gloom City Files, and it is a crime noir styled kind of game. It was written by a well-known German author, actually, who Cosmos approached because I think they were interested in trying different ways to work on these adventure games, and I think it worked rather well. The funny thing is, we didn't actually have that much to do with it at all, so I haven't even played it. I don't know what's in it. I'm waiting for it to come out in English as well. And the 6th one, the funny thing is, I know what the German title is, but I don't even know what the title is in English yet. Which is not very, I'm not trying to be coy for all the listeners out there, but it's like Im Nebelwrick or something. It's like in the forest. It's like in the Enchanted Forest. We always call it the Enchanted Forest in our playtesting, but it's not going to be called exactly that. It's actually one that's aimed at a bit of a lower audience. Sorry, not lower, younger audience. So I think it has 8+ on it, whereas most of the other ones have been 10 or 12, or like Monochrome was like 16+. Gloom City is 16+ as well. It's another more adult kind of one, which makes sense with crime noir. But yeah, this one was very specifically trying to be something that that could be a bit more understandable for younger children. So there's kind of shorter passages in a lot of the things. It's a more classical fantasy thing, but actually it's where everyone's animals. So you have 4 characters. It's going to test me. There's definitely one mole. Someone could be a mole. You can be a ram, I think, like a goat, turtle, and there's one more that I'm forgetting. But they're these really cool, like cartoon kind of characters that and you have to they all have their own stories that are being told that they're kind of discovering. So a bit like in Aban, with really fleshed out more the sense of personal progression. So you had these kind of personal quests in Aban that were definitely a part, but they were very much like side quests. In the 6th one, and you even kind of level up your characters, a little bit of slight role playing there. You have you can kind of make choices about your character, how they get better throughout the series, and a pretty rich story, like really interesting process working with Cosmos about the kind of story. And the 7th one that has actually been announced in German, it's called Expedition Azkana. And it's all the wonderful world of Indiana Jones and, action adventure, which I think we all knew that we would do at some point, because it's just like the perfect setting. And we all have our own. It's sort of funny because in the team we're all slightly different ages, so we all have a different sort of touchstone for that particular tropes and things like that. And we're currently working on that. We're still kind of like polishing it up now. But that will come out in German, I think, sometime next year, probably around the middle of next year. And there will be more. We're already talking about the 8th one, which I can't really talk about. And who knows, there might be some IPs in the future. Maybe, I'm not sure. Nothing is kind of certain. And I think in this kind of business as well, you don't count your chickens before they hatch. And also the pandemic has added this whole nother level of complication in terms of shipping physical products around the world. So to the listeners, I hope you've enjoyed the first 4. If you and I know Grand Hotel Aban's just coming out in English. I'm not sure exactly when to expect the next ones in English, to be honest, because of those complications. But I really hope that they will make their way there soon.
This is a question we like to ask everyone. What games are you playing currently? It doesn't have to be just an at-home game. We like getting to shout out other at-home puzzle mystery games. But are you playing like a video game? Are you playing board games? Just tell us what you've been enjoying.
Certainly. I mean, I'll start with 2 from the video game world, which I think are actually the best things I've played in the last, 4 or 5 years, and directly inspired me to make some other games. So the first is Her Story, which is a fantastic narrative puzzle. It's part puzzle, part narrative game. It's one of those games that you don't really want to talk very much about, and so I just tell your listeners, if you can get it on Steam or all of these kind of platforms. Maybe you've covered it on the podcast before, but just go out and give it. You won't be disappointed. And the other one is Return of the Obra Dinn, which is this amazing mashup of like old, 90s kind of aesthetic, green and black, pixelated art, a really captivating world of a ship washing up on shore in the early 19th century, and you're sent there as like an insurance agent to work out why did everyone die, and you just have this twist that you're able to sort of travel back in time and see these snapshots of when people die, but you have to kind of work out in this sort of almost deductive kind of puzzle about who is everybody and how did they die, and what actually happened to this ship. And that is also just completely immersive and incredible. In the tabletop space, I think I have a new game as well called Echoes from Ravensburger. It sounds, I don't necessarily want to toot my own horn, but it's an audio mystery game. So it's something even a bit more different from these sort of tabletop things. And we wanted to go away from games where you had to read, basically. I mean, that wasn't exactly the inspiration for it. Actually, was there originally was there is a thing called Museum in a Box, which we were talking before the podcast, a very slight tangent. My partner runs a film museum, and through that, she got to meet someone who made this box, which you could take objects in a museum, which would have like an RFID tag in them. You'd put them on the box, and the box would speak to you. It would tell you something about the object. And we thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to have a game where you didn't have to read anything? You'd just have some cards. You'd set up the box, maybe with an iPhone under it or something, and you'd take the object there, and it would just, you like give you its memory or its thing, and it would just kind of talk to you. And that's what Echoes is actually. It's slightly different. It works with an app which uses visual recognition it just has cards, and you just scan the card and then it gives you an audio track, and it's basically these snippets of a story which you have to try and put together by listening to them. And there's there's also not a lot of sound puzzles in these kind of things. So we're really happy how they kind of turn out. Again, it's a kind of a different it's a bit different to what has come before, I guess. I'm always interested in kind of experimenting and trying different things. So I think those would be my main recommendations. And the only other thing, it's not a particularly, well, we've talked about it already in the podcast, but Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, if you haven't played it yet, it can look a little bit imposing. And we were talking also a little bit about that we're all, I don't know where your listeners are, but there are these different silos of tabletop games and narrative games, escape rooms, and different products can look scary or welcoming to different parts of that audience. And I can imagine to maybe people who don't play a lot of board games seeing this like massive box with, lots of text, but it's been around for 30 plus years or 40 years now. And there's a reason for that, because it is just such an amazing invention in how it did that. And, still just completely engrossing and some really great puzzles and stories. And so I'd really recommend checking that out. Firstly, thank you very much for having me on. And it's a real pleasure actually to make these connections with new people. And I think that's why I love working in this industry. I love meeting people from kind of left field a little bit. So that's a real pleasure. Thank you, listeners, for listening this long if you're still here. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm really on Twitter. I'm at wisegoldfish, all one word. Don't ask why. I went through a really terrible phase where I would always do like anthropomorphic animals, and that somehow stuck with me, unfortunately, because I'm like Happy Squid on Board Game Geek, and anyway, it's all a bit ridiculous. But really, if you're interested, come on there. I'm always happy to chat about games and game design and narratives sort of games. So come and say hi, and yeah, if you could support me by buying one of my games, then do. The one thing about the adventure games is that they're completely, and again, maybe you've talked about this, that you play them and you can hand them on to someone else. There's nothing destroyed. Really great to share amongst your friends, and hopefully a bit of fun, something to do around Christmas or Thanksgiving. I guess we're already past Thanksgiving, but Christmas time if you want. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Matthew, we just want to say thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show today. We really enjoyed getting to experience what you created.
Yes.
If you would like to pick up an adventure game, all 4 of these games are now readily available on Amazon. You can visit there. We'll put a link in the show notes and you can pick them up there. These games are published and produced by Thames and Cosmos. So be sure to go to their page, leave them a review, leave them some feedback, give them a thumbs up on Facebook, like them. They have a variety of different products. This is the same company that publishes and produces Exit the Game, the series. So be sure to check out their diverse offerings on their website as well. Zach, what can our listeners do to help us out?
Yeah, so there's many different things you can do. The thing that we appreciate the most is go to wherever you're listening to this podcast. If that's on Spotify, if that's iTunes, if that's Google, Stitcher, any of those places that have a review section or a place where you can like it. Leave us a like, leave us a 5-star review. We'd super appreciate it. It's been awesome going and looking and seeing that there are some now. We super appreciate all of them. You can also go like our social medias. You can go to Facebook at Puzzling Company or Instagram at Puzzling Company and come give us a follow, see updates when we have new episodes, potentially join conversations in the PPGM group. We always have some fun times in there, getting to talk to some amazing people and creators, and maybe send me some money. I can give you my personal address if you like. I'll take free money.
Just make it out to cash.
Yes, please.
That really is going to wrap us up for this week, Zach. I would call us gluttons for punishment because we've gone from putting a lot of time into one episode. Do you know what's coming next?
Yes.
What?
We're doing Key Enigmas Hack Forward.
That's it, man. I am so excited to play this game.
I am too.
It is advertised as a longer game, though. So we'll take a break when we're dead.
Yeah, it's true.
But that's going to be all for us today. For Jared and Zach, this is Puzzling Company.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening. Find us on social media at Puzzling Company and online at puzzlingcompany.com. Check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, keep puzzling.
This has been Rogue Media Network